Hello everyone, my name is Joy Malete and welcome to Money Matters. Money Matters is an interactive show that aims to educate our viewers on their consumer rights and provide advice on money-related matters. Do you perhaps have a money-related matter or issue that you would like advice on? Please do contact us and we may be able to provide you with some expert advice. On today's show, we are talking all things debt, borrowings. What are the advantages and disadvantages of loan? And joining me to unpack on this topic is Mr. Justice Dube, a former lecturer and banker. But before we welcome Mr. Justice Dube, please do not forget that you are part of this conversation. So please reach out to us on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag #MMOnSID. Hashtag #MMOnSID at the SID Media. We are keen on hearing your views and comments on today's topic. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we're talking about a very common topic. We all, at some point, run to debt to finance certain things in our lives. But let's just maybe touch on loans 101. What is a loan?
That's a very broad question
Yes.
in terms of a loan, because there's certain things that we don't realize that are actual loans when we do them.
Okay.
Just when you go to a friend and say, can I borrow some money from you? I'll give it to you in a week's time. That is actually a loan. It is actually a contract. We have got a contractual obligation to pay that money back, except that because it's between friends, the follow-up, the payment may be delayed or even written off without you realizing that you have actually borrowed until you are reminded sometimes. But when you think of a loan, I always want to think about it as borrowing from the future to satisfy an immediate need. Now, that need may be justified or is simple, in most of our cases, conspicuous living. But the important thing being that you are borrowing from the future cash flows with a promise to enjoy the future cash flows now that I will pay back. And in its simplest form, I've already given an example, but you can also think about when you go to any shopping store that offers you credit, that is actually a loan because you need to pay it back. And there are consequences if you do not pay it back. So you can also borrow from future cash flows to invest now in order to create bigger cash flows for the future. So it depends on which angle you are looking at the loan.
Yeah. Okay, so we're not really touching on the invest. I think that's a bit sophisticated for now for our conversation today. But we're just referring, I suppose, we just want to touch on the basics of lending or borrowings, right? And the various types that are often available in the market, secured, unsecured, what are the differences there? And how does that actually impact on the interest that you then get charged?
Yeah, so there's quite a lot out there. I mean, I'm, as an individual, I do not like loans unless if they are necessary. And that is what I try to impart to young people as well, and say that if you cannot save for what you want, then you could actually be creating a problem for yourself. I don't know how many emails or text messages that I have received, and I still receive, offering me 200. You have qualified for a
Yes.
200,000 loan. You have 250. Do you know what you can use? Most of us fall into that particular trap because you hear that you have already been pre-qualified.
And yet it was unsolicited, right?
It's unsolicited, but it's obviously somebody who is trying to create a web around you so that you cannot escape it.
Yeah.
So when you then think of a loan of secured and unsecured, if you think of it from a practical point of view, if I come to you and I say, can you give me a loan, $1,000, I'll give it back by, that's unsecured because it's my word of mouth. If I default and not pay it back, there's nothing you can
no
do.
claim, yeah.
You have no claim on it, on me. But if I say to you, you know what, I need the 1,000, but I've got a cell phone, I've got a watch, I've got a car, I've got an asset that I can attach to the loan to show that I am actually committed to paying you back. In the event that I don't pay you back, then you can take this asset and sell it and recoup your expenses. So that would be the secured. So then when you look at it from a secured, unsecured point of view, you may actually then realize that the interest rates on the unsecured
This is high risk.
is a high because it's high risk. Because interest is in relation to the risk, perceived risk that the lender sees in you. So if I've got an asset, I've got to think of it, all right, if I'm going to get a cell phone, what am I going to do with that cell phone? Can I dispose of it quickly, etc., etc.? If I do not think it qualifies, I'll say, no, I do not want that asset. Bring another asset onto it. So that is another way of securing a loan. Or I can call a brother, a friend who probably has got better assets and say, please, can you sign for me as surety? So that in the event that I do not pay you, then you don't even come to me, you go to him because he has signed as a surety. So that would be some form or examples of secured.
Secure versus
loans.
unsecured, I see. And I suppose there is a prevalent type in South Africa, right, where most South Africans are actually, where we are entangled. What is that? What's that type of loan where we find ourselves, the majority of South Africans in?
Unfortunately, a majority of us don't even have assets because the assets that we have still belong to a bank. So I cannot come and bring my car and say that I'm bringing it as a secured, to secure a loan because I'm indebted to it, to the bank.
It's not yours.
It's not mine in the first place. So that's why you'll find that quite a lot of debt in South Africa is unsecured.
Would that be the personal loans?
This year is about clothes. If you go and buy things on account, your car probably you say is secured in the event that the bank can call it back. But if you wanted to go and present it to another bank other than where you got the loan from, then you can't. So the prevalent ones that you'll find in the market are unsecured.
Like your personal loans, and you mentioned your closing accounts and things like that.
Yeah.
And
they add up.
And they do, right?
Yes.
And
before you know it, they add up. You think, okay, what happened to all my money? What happened to all my money? Yeah. And one of the things that I do find, which is interesting, is how it is easy to use your check card to buy coffee for 15 rand. You just swipe it. At the end of the month, you don't actually go back to tally how much coffees did I buy. But what you see is that the balance that is remaining in my account, there is a problem. I cannot service all the other debts because they accumulate.
Quite an interesting conversation that we're having today. And I'm sure that you've got a lot of questions, comments, that you'd like to share with us. So please do engage with us on our social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter at the SID Media, on YouTube using the hashtag #MMOnSID. See you back right after this.
All of these and more on SID Media TV.
Welcome back to Money Matters. If you have just joined us, we are talking debt, borrowings, as some may know it. And in studio, we've got our guest, Mr. Justice Dube, former lecturer and banker, who is helping us unpack on this topic. Tate Dube, before the break, we were talking about, some of the prevalent types that most South Africans run towards or to, right, in the event that they find themselves in trouble. Right. And I just want to maybe pick up on those troubles. What are some of the reasons that people actually take out loans?
The reasons could be quite many.
Yes.
Because each situation is different. But the important thing is that in South Africa, there is a lot of credit that is available. There is a lot of people who want to ensnare you with a debt.
Okay.
And you'll always find a reason to use money.
Supply
So, yes, I mean, for instance, you find your gym membership being now attached to a credit card to make it easy for you to get into debt without you realizing that you're actually getting into debt. And the most prevalent that most people find themselves in is probably credit card debt. Because you're just a young professional, you have just now been given this job, you now also want to show that you have arrived, you want to get a car, you have got a good job, so the first thing you go, bond yourself with a car, you haven't even thought about what do I need to do in terms of accommodation.
I see.
Or maybe I'm still staying with my parents, and then the parents tell you, it's time to move. All of a sudden, you cannot fund it. But is that debt? Credit card? And you can get a lot of credit cards. In principle, I don't like a credit card.
Yes.
In fact, I spent the better half of my life without a credit card. I was forced when I joined the current bank that I work for because they said, you've got to have a credit card.
Yeah.
At your level, you need to have a credit card. And I have always been against credit card because I have seen friends and family being entangled in that kind of
Revolving debt.
revolving debt.
Yeah.
And as soon as you get into the maximum, closer to the maximum, guess what? The bank calls you. I think we need to increase your limits. You still have a capacity to increase. And because you have got a need to want to pay something, you also quickly say yes. And then without realizing, because now you need something else from the mall, you go and open an account because you want to, and then it accumulates.
Instantaneously, yeah.
Yes. So credit, if you are credit worthy, is always available. Until you mess up that credit rating, then you realize that you begin to stink. No one wants to talk to you.
I see. But I suppose we're also told that, you need to get, as soon as you start working, you need to build your profile, your credit profile, and things like that. And you get sold these credit cards as a mechanism of building your credit profile. But I hear the points which you've strongly
Once I have you,
put across.
I can't let you go.
You can't let me go, right?
Yes.
And I think you've touched on this previously, and I just want us to elaborate further and go deeper into some of the key considerations, especially as if I'm going into this. What should I consider before actually even approaching a financial institution or a credit provider to say, listen, I'm looking for credit to do this? For me, what is it that should be key, that I should be considering before actually making that move?
You've got to ask, do I need to borrow?
Do I?
Do I need to borrow or do I need to save? If I need to borrow, do I have the capacity to pay? What if interest rates change?
I see.
What happens to my excess cash flow? Because you've got to look at how your monthly bill comes about. Then you come to the end of it, you realize that your net cash that you are left with is 5,000 rand. Then you say, if I go and borrow, out of this 5,000 rand, am I going to be able to feed myself? Because I'm assuming that you have paid the rent if you are renting. And then what happens to this 5,000 rand if I borrow and I'm required to pay 4,000 rand a month when interest rates go up? Because once interest rates go up, you got a problem. Because you are going to be negative in your excess cash. That's why you are going to now want to borrow from Paul to pay Peter. And then you are going to go and open more debt. So for me, is the question, do I need it now? I mean, the worst thing is being in a queue and you find somebody putting, buying food on credit card. You're like saying, really?
So
and I always say, for me, if I travel a lot in my job, and sometimes I have an urge to call, but roaming charges are expensive.
Yes.
Then when I get that bill, and that bill is showing that I'm sitting extra 1,000, I'm like saying, who did I call? Why did I call? But that gratification that I received at the end is not worth the pain I'm finding myself now that I've got to pay the bill. So that is what happens when somebody buys food on credit card.
On credit. And you've mentioned quite an interesting point, which I really want you to touch on and elaborate on, right? The fact that oftentimes we forget that there's this interest component, and the interest is oftentimes not fixed. So it varies, and sometimes we forget. Like right now, interest rates are low.
Yes.
So we probably borrowing. What are the dangers?
Now, if you have got 4 loans, all 4 loans are going to increase their interest rates. And all of a sudden, 1,000 is gone just by one single interest rate being risen from, say, 6 to 7%. And you're gone. All your excess cash is gone. Now, also think, if you were to lose your job, you do not have a side hustle. How are you going to pay for this loan? And most people do not think about those things because they think that they're in control of the future.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet your future cash flows that you have brought this side to enjoy are not guaranteed.
Might not even be available.
Yes. So you get an increase, an interest rate increase affecting 4 loans, you lose your job,
Oh my word.
you are done.
God forbid.
This is why you're going to find a high incidence of suicide because people are going to worry, now if I've got to have my car taken, what will people think of me? If I'm going to have to move out of my apartment, what will people think of me?
Exactly.
So because we are living for outside, conspicuous living, comparing with the Joneses, and yet you forget to look at yourself. Hence, I say, if you've got to borrow, ask yourself, do I need it?
Is there
Why?
necessity?
See, there's nothing wrong with borrowing. I'm not against borrowing. So if you are borrowing and getting a loan for an asset, and for instance, a home, an apartment, that's good because you cannot raise all that money. But you know that 9 out of 10, the chances are that that property is going to increase in value. So you have actually borrowed to increase your balance sheet. So that kind of borrowing is fine because if you lose a job, you can say for 1 month, I'm going to rent it out. Or if it persists, you're going to sell.
I see. Please hold on to that. Quite an interesting conversation that we're having today. And I'm sure that you've got a lot of questions, comments, that you'd like to share with us. So please do engage with us on our social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter at the SID Media, on YouTube using the hashtag #MMOnSID. See you back right after this. Welcome back to Money Matters. Yes, if you are just joining us, unfortunately, we have reached the last segment of our topic and discussion today, and we were talking, or we are still talking, about debt. And joining us to unpack on this topic is Mr. Justice Dube, a former lecturer and banker, not a former banker, current banker, but former lecturer. Mr. Justice, before the break, I think you touched on quite a very important element, right, of what really happens when you're unable to repay your debts and, you know, the high suicide rates that we are seeing. And I suppose that talks to the mental or the prevalence of mental illness within our age group. Can you maybe just expand a bit on that?
Yeah, look, in my lifetime, I've encountered quite a lot of young people that have found themselves in this spin. But I always say it's not the end of the world. The greatest thing that you can do to yourself and for yourself is the ability to de-gear your balance sheet. The ability to take a step back and say, this is not working, this year is going to break me, and say, let me go back to my starting point and start afresh. And that may also mean that you must chop all your credit cards that you have, you know, just for you to get back to that mental wellness, to say that I'm in control of my finances. I had a colleague once who lost her job, and the first thing she said, I'm selling the house. That shouldn't be. Because in our planning, you should be able to look ahead and play various scenarios. What happens? Do I have enough savings in my account so that in the event that I lose my future income, I can still continue to live for 3 or 4 months without me changing too drastically what I'm currently enjoying? And most of us, because we enjoy present consumption, we don't think about the future. As a result, we find ourselves in these stressful conditions, which then affect our interpersonal relationships with our families, with our friends. We go into hibernation, thinking that we are running away. But the best thing when you get to that position, take a step back and ask the question, what did I do wrong? Where can I correct and how?
And how?
And there's help available out there.
To actually fix your situation. And I suppose a lot of us also then, we find ourselves in a situation where now we can't go to these big financial institutions to borrow money. Then we find ourselves at the doorstep of, say, umashonis and loan sharks. That's how we know them, right? Is it advisable to actually go there?
My advice is stay away.
Stay away.
You are better off with a regulated entity, because the regulated entity can only blacklist you. Now, the loan shark, there's a reason why they're called a loan shark.
Like cash.
You are going to lose limbs. So, my suggestion, no matter how tempted you are, don't go, because they will charge you high interest rates. And when they want their money, they want their money.
And now?
You cannot negotiate. If you negotiate, you are reconfiguring your debt by increasing it. A debt of 100 rand that is unpaid in 3-4 months can easily be 1,000 rand.
I see.
With a loan shark. So stay away.
And how advisable is it that, I suppose you've stated it clearly when we started that you're not a fan of borrowings. But when I'm actually in the situation where I do have loans, how important is it that I actually make good on the repayments?
Extremely important. There is nothing that is as important in our market as a good credit rating. Don't miss a payment. Don't go and reschedule a debt and say, can I? Because whereas the lender is saying yes, they are making notes to say that this person is distressed, they cannot, and your credit score goes lower. You kind of put, if you think of an accelerator, you're taking your foot off the accelerator. So they won't tell you that there's, oh no, we are happy to negotiate new payment terms with you. Meanwhile, they will be going back, and then you look at your credit score, you go to the next guy, they do not want to give you a loan. And you think, why? It is that account at a clothing shop that you went and asked for. He said, I know I'm supposed to pay you 300 rand, so I'm going to pay you 100 rand.
And now you actually need it. It's a necessary one. Now you've reassessed and you're like,
Exactly.
it's a necessary
Yes.
loan, but you've actually messed up your credit rating.
So most
score.
people do not actually understand the importance of credit rating, because credit rating has to do with responsibility, has to do with the trust, has to do with integrity. Are you a man or woman of your word?
Integrity, I see.
If you have said, I'm borrowing, meet your obligation, you'll never go wrong.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. You've said quite a mouthful, and I'm quite keen on hearing what your passing shots, I suppose, for the viewers. If we forget everything, right? What is it that you want us to remain with?
If you have to borrow,
Must be necessary.
it must be necessary. Not to finance recurrent expenditure like food, not to finance clothes. That you should be able to budget for. And I always say that if you're going to lend a friend some money, lend what you are prepared to lose.
Of course.
Because
You
the
find-
chances are they will not pay back.
Thank you so much. It was quite an interesting. I wish it didn't have to come to an end. But thank you so much for joining
Thank
us
you
and
for
sharing
having
all
me.
those insights.
Thank you for
I think we've
having me.
learned quite a lot
Thanks,
from
Joy.
this discussion today. Well, there you have it, our viewers. We've come literally to the end of the show. But listen, you can still interact with us on Facebook and Twitter. And the hashtag to use is #MM on SID at the SID Media. Well, we'll see you next week right here. Same time, same place on Money Matters. And from me, Joy Malete, and the rest of the Money Matters team, it is goodbye and God bless you.